Hey everyone, welcome back to the Read Report. I'm your host, Nicole Ryan, and jury selection is officially underway in the Commonwealth versus Karen Reed. Things are moving pretty fast. We've already got, I think, 10 jurors seated for this new trial, and there's even a chance that we might have a full seated jury by the end of next week. Who knows? But since we're not quite fully into the swing of things with trial testimony not yet beginning, I want to take today's episode to revisit another case. This case is one I've touched on before, but one that I think deserves a deeper look, especially right now where there's not as much going on with the Karen Reed case, because we're kind of in limbo waiting for the trial to start, especially in light of the new developments in Canton town politics. So what am I talking about with that? Well, for those of you who are following Canton town politics closely, perhaps you're from Canton or another local area, or you're just really big on John O'Keefe's case, you may have heard of the case of Sandra Birchmore. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. I've kind of alluded to this case before on my podcast, and before we go any further, I just want to remind you guys, this story is heartbreaking. It involves allegations of abuse, systemic failures, and ultimately a young woman and her death. So listener discretion is advised. But if you're down to hear about Sandra's story, I advise that you listen in, because it's really quite a captivating one and involves a lot of the same players in terms of the Norfolk County DA's office and Canton Police Department and all that. So earlier this week, for those of you familiar with what's been going down in Canton, as you can imagine, there was a lot of uproar in the wake of John O'Keefe's death. Town politics had gotten kind of saturated with Canton police drama and trying to hold Canton police accountable. And originally they had ordered that this independent audit be done of a police investigation. They actually voted on it. The vote just barely passed, but it did pass. So they had to do a Canton police audit by a third-party audit investigation company. And that company, called Five Stones Intelligence, just this week released their 200-page report detailing their findings. So the audit spanned from department activities from 2015 to 2025, and it was commissioned by the town vote in the wake of John O'Keefe's death. And the report noted significant weaknesses in Canton PD's evidence handling, witness interview procedures, and crime scene management, specifically calling out deficiencies in the O'Keefe case. But notably, the auditor said they found no evidence of a conspiracy to frame Karen Reed, and they said they received full cooperation from the Canton Police Department. As part of the report, Five Stones reviewed several high-profile investigations handled by the Canton Police Department, and one of those cases does, in fact, include the case of Sandra Birchmore. They concluded in the audit that CPD's initial response to the Birchmore crime scene followed standard protocols. They did everything right in terms of protocols, but as you'll see, what came before and after the moment paints a much more disturbing picture if you're actually looking into the case as a whole. So who was Sandra Birchmore? Sandra Birchmore grew up in Stoughton, Mass. She was raised primarily by her single mother. She reportedly idolized law enforcement from a very young age. At just 12 years old, Sandra Birchmore applied to join the Stoughton Police Department's Explorer program. Now, what's the Explorer program? The Explorers program is a youth vocational program designed to introduce kids to careers in policing. And so it just so happens that the Boy Scouts of America somehow founded or organized the Explorers program, and they have a bunch of chapters all over the country. At the time, the program, the local chapter in Stoughton, was overseen by an officer named Robert Devine. Devine had climbed the ranks in the Stoughton Police Department from school resource officer to deputy chief, and under Devine's leadership, his colleagues said that the Explorers program in Stoughton shifted from a mentorship youth program to more of a paramilitary-style training environment. As guest instructors, Robert Devine, the leader of the program, brought on the Farwell twins, Matthew and William Farwell. The two Farwell twins had actually been explorers themselves, reportedly. They were once teenagers and participated in the programs themselves, and then they were brought on to the Stoughton Explorer program guest instructors. All three of these men, Matthew and William, the twins, and Robert Devine, the leader of the Stoughton chapter of the Explorers program, became central figures in Sandra Birchmore's life. And at first, the program outwardly seemed to be having a positive influence on Sandra. Her mother even wrote a letter to the Canton Police Department Explorer Program founder, Robert Devine, basically expressing her thanks for him for running it. But behind the scenes, Birchmore and Matthew Farwell, one of the Farwell twins who was brought on as a guest instructor and then later hired by the Canton Police Department, had reportedly grown closer. They met at the local library occasionally, where Farwell would help her with test prep and with homework. And eventually, their relationship turned sexual, allegedly. Now, this is still an ongoing case, so everybody's innocent until proven guilty, right? But according to court documents and text messages, Birchmore confided in friends that the relationship began when she was just 15 years old, and Farwell was 26 years old. She would later write that he had taken her virginity before she was 16, and that they had been sexually involved for nearly a decade. By early 2021, Sandra Birchmore, now 23, was expecting her first child. She was excited. She'd cut back on coffee consumption. She was picking out clothes, picking out a stroller. She even made a handmade poster announcing the pregnancy with the words, "Congrats, we're going to be parents." But reportedly, the baby daddy, Farwell, with whom Sandra allegedly had this relationship with for almost a decade, didn't share that same excitement. According to text messages, when Birchmore shared the news, Farwell responded coldly, saying, "I wish you were dead." Birchmore also told friends that he had become increasingly angry and aggressive when she would bring up things about the baby, shoving Birchmore allegedly and once putting her in a headlock. But despite this, Birchmore continued trying to involve him. She would text him about appointments, ultrasounds, baby planning, asking what kind of family they might become. Meanwhile, Farwell had about to have 3 children of his own with his wife. He was fully married at this time, but she kept chasing him down, trying to hope that maybe he would be involved with the baby. And then in January of 2021, someone who Sandra Birchmore knew reportedly contacted the Canton Police Department to report Farwell's relationship with Birchmore. And Farwell was furious. He messaged Birchmore angrily, telling her that someone had called his job and that she'd blown everything up. But shortly after that outburst, Birchmore told a friend that Farwell had shown up at her apartment, seemingly trying to smooth things over. He told her that he wanted to be around, and if she kept it a secret and he had an extra key, he would pop in and visit. And then she saw him kind of looking around her apartment, looking in her closet, looking in her bathroom, something that made her uncomfortable, but she wasn't really sure why, and she was just probably happy that he was going to be involved with the child's life and seemingly wanted to be around more. Well, on February 1st, Farwell texted Birchmore asking if he could stop by. And 3 days later, on February 4th, 2021, Canton Police responded to a wellness check at Birchmore's apartment because a coworker had called after she failed to show up for work for a few days. So the Canton Police were patched in because she lived in Canton at the time. And inside Sandra Birchmore's apartment, they found her body. She was seated in a reclined position on the floor with a duffel bag strap around her neck tied to her closet doorknob. The same closet that Farwell had allegedly stuck his head in a few days earlier, almost a week earlier, when he last came by. First responders, the Canton Police Department, believed she'd been dead for days. Initially, the Canton Police Department and the medical examiner ruled Sandra Birchmore's death a suicide. But there were just a lot of things that weren't adding up, according to Sandra's family and friends. They were suspicious. She had a load of laundry going while she was allegedly dying. Her apartment was filled with signs of life. As they cleaned out her apartment, they noticed there was a baby stroller fully wrapped, unopened packages delivered days after to her with things for the baby. So they pushed for answers, and eventually it was revealed that Matthew Farwell had been the last known person to enter her apartment. and the case was handed over to the Massachusetts State Police. But in 2022, Norfolk County DA Michael Morrissey's office stated that there was no evidence of foul play. Public outrage ensued, and finally, in August of 2024, federal authorities stepped in. They indicted Matthew Farwell for strangling Sandra Birchmore, allegedly, and staging the scene to make it appear like a suicide. Another thing that they pointed out, which was unique in Sandra Birchmore's alleged suicide, was that her hyaloid bone was broken, something that in any sort of hangings or seated suicides, it's pretty rare. It's more consistent usually with being strangled. So, yet another question mark, right? And it is awfully concerning that initially it was ruled a suicide. That wasn't all in terms of the inappropriate relations with the Stoughton Police Department officers and Sandra Birchmore. Allegedly, Farwell's twin brother William and the deputy chief who started that Explorer program chapter in Stoughton, Robert Devine, also allegedly had inappropriate relationships with Birchmore, though theirs were after she turned 18. Still, both of them have since resigned from the Stoughton Police Force. And disturbingly, this as a whole isn't apparently an isolated case. The Explorers program, which introduced Birchmore to all three of these men, has faced some nationwide allegations of abuse. Over 190 allegations have been reported in different chapters across the country, the vast majority of which involve law enforcement officers allegedly abusing young girls. This story is more than just about one victim. It's more than just about Sandra Birchmore. It's about the systems that failed her and people like her. It's about the abuse of power, people hiding behind their badges and weaponizing it as a form of abuse, about the myth of the protection under the badge. And in a town like Canton, still reeling from John O'Keefe's case, Sandra Birchmore's story reminds us of the urgent need for accountability, oversight, and truth. We'll continue to follow both trials closely. Karen Reed's and eventually Matthew Farwell. Matthew Farwell's trial date is still not set, but he's awaiting trial with federal charges against him. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and thank you as always for listening to The Reed Report. And remember, everybody is innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great week. Take care.